and I'm joined by someone who has been directly impacted by the same kind of thing, an airline disaster, albeit with an answer far sooner. Heidi Snow lost her fiancé in the TWA Flight 800 crash, and since then Heidi has started a support group for plane crash victims called ACCESS, or Aircraft Casualty Emotional Support Services. Heidi, thanks for being with us. I saw an interview with you last week in which you spoke of the uniqueness of what air crash victims go through, meaning they have so long to wait for answers so often. But then this story has become even more bizarre, and I wanted to check back in with you because Sarah talking the way she did, not knowing from one day to the next whether these conflicting stories mean her loved one is a hostage or her loved one is dead. I can't imagine how you would answer her questions.
Right. So a lot of what she said definitely resonates with me, and so many people who have called us for help after this incident who have lost people in past air disasters, who are really reliving it and remember this waiting time with all these incidents. That's what distinguishes air disasters from other types of sudden loss, is we really don't have information, and it usually takes a really long time before we actually can confirm they were in fact aboard the plane, before the remains are actually found. And in this case, there's definitely hope that there might be an alternative. And it is just so difficult. I remember I held on to hope for 5 weeks, waiting for some kind of confirmation that he was actually on the plane. And I can tell you, I thought so many times, maybe he didn't actually get on that plane. And I tried to keep everything the same way it was, because I thought for sure he could come back and things were going to be the way they used to be. And that was definitely something that I held on to get through those weeks. It was so critical to have that hope, and anyone who would listen and allow me to keep him alive and talk about him was what I needed at that time. And we've really found that with ACCESS, the same thing. People are calling and they're reliving it, and they're wanting to talk about their loved ones again. And for me, I was lucky. I had a woman who had lost her fiance on Pan Am Flight 103, and she would sit with me. It had been 8 years for her, but she allowed me to talk about him and hold out that hope, because that's what I needed to get through, was to hold on to that and keep him alive.
I saw you in an interview saying, and it just made so much sense, that your organization actually sets up like-minded people, meaning a spouse with a spouse, a brother with a brother, so that they have that, you know, that intimate connection about what it's like to have gone through this. Both of these people suffering through the same sort of thing. And I can only think that you're exactly like Sarah. You lost your fiance. She lost her life partner. What would you say to her specifically?
It is just so difficult, and the hardest thing, it's like your future is planned, and suddenly you have to rethink that and move forward. And when people would say that to me, I couldn't even imagine what that meant. And it wasn't important at that time. At this point in time, I really just needed to keep talking about him and holding out hope. And that is how I got through every hour.
How long
and
do you
the
do
other
that,
side,
though, Heidi? I always wonder about hope is important. I get that right now, but at some point, do you have to turn the corner and say, we need to move on, and the hope needs to be replaced by perhaps a very sad reality?
Right, and that's inevitable, and that will happen down the road, depending on what the outcome is. But during this time, this early on, I have to say that this is a form of survival, is to be able to hold on to that hope, and it's critical.
Have you had anybody?
I remember so well.
Sorry, so we have that really awkward delay, but have you had anybody reach out to you? I know there were only 2 Americans on board on this particular incident, but has ACCESS been had an overture already about this crash, or about this incident?
We usually, after incidents like this, when the details start coming in, is when people call us for help. And right now, I think it's about that time where we usually begin receiving calls. But since this incident occurred, we got a surge of calls from people from past incidents, just wanting to talk about their loved ones and all reliving this moment, which has been extremely difficult for those who have been through a similar situation in the past. And they've reached out to talk to grief mentors as well. And certainly we are here for all the people from this crash. We match people according to the relationship of their loss. We match mothers to mothers, siblings to siblings, spouses to spouses, so that there's a similarity in what they're going
Heidi,
through. And we also...
Can you, I was just going to ask you if you could stay after the break. I have a question I want you to answer. I hadn't really thought of it until this very moment while you were just speaking. And after the break, if you could let me know when something like this happens, do people who have suffered through this before, people like you, family members of Lockerbie, of 800, of Swiss Air 111, are they having to relive that? You know, I'm going to ask you now. I'm not even going to go to break. Do you get calls from people who are just suffering all over again, even though they didn't know one person on this plane?
Absolutely. That's,
and what do they say? And
that's what our influx of calls have been.
How do you counsel them? What do you say?
We're finding that most of them really want to tell their story again, and they're reliving it, and they are just so concerned and empathetic to all the people aboard this plane, and they feel for them. We all do. We remember what that was like, and it's really difficult, and it's really painful, and it's a very long process, and we said goodbye, and we never thought that would be our final goodbye. That seemed impossible. And there's so many unspoken things that we had that we never got to say. And I just remember it was not real.
You know, despite the fact that you are the person who is giving out the help, I don't know if anybody has said to you that they're thinking of you at this time, because you are as well a victim of a disaster like this. Thank you for the work that you do. I think it's really valuable, and thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate it, Heidi.
Thank you very much.
Heidi is accesshelp.org. It's a great organization.